Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the TCD podcast. Boogie Bumper here, joined as always by my compadres, my comrades, my compatriots, the voice of reason, Adam J, and sexual chocolate, Varun Prasad. How are we, gents?
Shadow of my former self. Capitalism's been
Capitalism's
ripping
been a bitch.
the flesh off my bones.
Oh, that's terrible.
But yeah, I'm fresh and ready to go. Got my beer, got the mic in front of me,
Yep.
and two good lads to speak with.
You said before the show you've been working hard lately, 11, 12-hour days.
Yeah.
Is this more... Are you more likely to vote for socialism now? Like, if you were living in New York, for example, would you be racing out to be a booster for
Alexandria?
For Ocasio-Cortez?
Yeah, is it? I don't even know. I can never remember her name.
Yeah.
But no, I don't think I'll ever hate capitalism that much.
You'd have to really hate capitalism.
I heard she had a bit of a train wreck interview
She
about
did a little bit,
wow.
yeah. She said the unemployment figures are low because everybody's working two jobs.
That's right, and this is a person, that touted that. She's got an economics degree.
Yeah. I think it was James Woods on Twitter who actually said, it's great that you've got an economics degree, but weren't you working as a bartender?
Yeah, like 6 months before you got elected.
Yeah. She also said, unemployment is high because everybody's working two jobs. And she said, this is a byproduct of like the rampant Wild West capitalism society that we have. And like straight away, I'm thinking like, well, what about all those taxes and regulations? Like those are not very capitalism, right? I know Wealth of Nations is a pretty big book and I almost got through it all. Like, I think that's a badge of honor, really.
Oh, yeah. Well,
I almost got through it all. But I think you have to read a couple of chapters of, the Capitalist Manifesto, as it should otherwise be known, if you're going to call yourself an economist. But then again, she's a socialist, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, she's a socialist through and through. And, this is another hero that the Democrats will adopt now. And she's going to be campaigning all around the country, really.
Yeah.
Socialist through and through now, but didn't her father have some flourishing business in New York as well?
Yeah, she came from a rich background.
Yeah. Living up
She
in
tried to say
Rochester.
that she was like living a broke girl's life in Brooklyn or something, but it turned out to be a lie. So it started off well. How you been, Adam J?
Oh, good. Yeah, a little bit under the weather.
Under the weather?
Yeah, a bit nasally.
Is it capitalism's fault?
Well, obviously.
Obviously.
Yeah, so...
Isn't it always?
Yeah, it's always capitalism's fault. So, yeah, but not too bad, not too bad. Ready to rock and roll.
Ready to rock and roll. Shall we kick it off with some Australia news? Let's go.
Aussie, mate.
I'd just like to keep people abreast of what we're doing down here, guys. Keep people informed. You're not welcome in Melbourne. Greens tells PM and Dutton. So the Prime Minister and Malcolm Dutton. God,
No,
Peter Dutton. That's how out
Kind
of the
of
loop I am.
weird hybrid there.
Yeah. Malcolm Dutton, you're not welcome. This is from The Australian. Greens MP Adam Bandt has told Malcolm Turnbull and Peter Dutton that they are not welcome in Melbourne, accusing them of trying to use race to win votes and whip up hatred, because nothing wins votes like whipping up hatred and getting a lot of people to hate you. Like that's a clear win strategy. In comments about African gang violence in Victoria, as it's otherwise known, the People's Democratic Republic of Victoria, Mr. Dutton this morning described Victoria as a, quote, parallel universe and a fairyland after there was a 70% spike in complaints to the state's Human Rights Commissioner over his comments about African gang violence. It's good to see the Victorians have got their priorities right. Here you have this, obviously, this white supremacist, this fascist, this Nazi, coming out saying, there are concerns in Melbourne about African gang violence, and all of the people jump on board to report him to the Human Rights Commission. I think that's fantastic for progress. The Home Affairs Minister also slammed the New Zealand Justice Minister for criticising Australia's policy of deporting New Zealand citizens who have committed crimes. Like, just take that sentence in isolation. Like, what balls from the Kiwis? How dare you send back our citizens who commit crimes in your country?
Yeah,
you bigot.
Yeah, we're supposed to be sending them over to you in Australia.
Exactly.
You keep our criminals, right?
Like, I know we were once a criminal island, but those days are well behind us. Like, come on, embrace progress, guys. Pledged to sort out the Administrative Appeals Tribunal after a series of decisions on migration cases, which he says are unacceptable for the community. Now, this is the young Greens MP. He's the only Greens member in the House of Parliament. They do have a few senators our favorite young lady, Sarah Hanson-Young.
Yeah.
She's one of them. Crime is down in Victoria, and the Sudanese population make up 1% of crimes, as far as I understand the statistics. So there is not a problem with African gangs in the way that Peter Dutton is talking about. He says here, what there is a problem with is Liberal politicians using fear and using race to try to win votes, because we know that ends in violence. You see, because pointing out
Violence.
violence leads to violence. So the best way to deal with violence, I assume, for the Greens is to just not talk about it, and then everybody gets on a lot better. So he said the Prime Minister and Peter Dutton are not welcome here. And I just want to play a clip before I go to your guys' comments. For those who have previously mocked and sullied my long-held thesis that the left of politics is the exact same in every single Western democracy, Western country in the world, like basically the same playbook, I just want to put this up for you.
And if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome.
They're not welcome here. They're not welcome anywhere. Voice of Reason, Adam J. Is the government racist?
Well, well, absolutely not. I mean, this goes back to the conversation about, that Australians have certain expectations of people that want to migrate here.
Sure.
I mean, as an immigrant myself, I mean, every immigrant feels that, you're coming into a country, you're an outsider.
Well, can I just say, all three of us are from immigrant families, and I think we're all first generation.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah, I came here as a, a young kid.
Yep.
So technically, I'm...
you're ground zero.
Yeah, I'm ground zero, but there is an expectation here that you adhere to some kind of minimal level of decorum, and people in Melbourne are pretty much not happy about some of the Sudanese gangs and what they're doing, and of course it's going to be talked about, and politicians are going to react.
Well, it's like we all saw the footage, didn't we, of what was it, like 200 youths running down Melbourne streets, like, knocking people over, upturning chairs, tables, which in of itself, like, depending on where you're from in the world, you're like, it's just kids having fun, right?
Yeah, but larrikinism.
Yeah, but to a lot of people, especially when they start brandishing machetes and stuff, then that steps up the reality. So if we can't mention stuff like that, along with, I mean, everybody's seen on shows like A Current Affair and stuff, people are now doing like Neighbourhood Watch again because of the amount of break-ins and carjackings and stuff. So even if statistics show like, well, in the big scheme of things, it's not that big of a problem, I guess you can't get people to reject their own observable reality, can you?
Absolutely, and this, you're assuming that the statistics are right.
Yeah.
I would suggest, I don't like to use that phrase, but I would suggest that the statistics have been toned down. That a lot of these crimes are not reported, or not reported in a way that would make the Sudanese community look bad, because we're all being multicultural here, and we can't do these type of things because this helps the libs, this helps the right wingers.
Mustn't do that.
Yeah, mustn't do that. So this is definitely a problem for Melbourne.
It's funny you say that. We'll go to Varun for a comment, but I remember. Do you remember the Cologne sex attacks, right? In Germany. Now, I remember seeing a quote from someone, and I think it was someone in German police, who said, the reason that we don't want these things reported is because it will add fuel to the right wing of politics. Oh, actually, it was someone from the television network, sorry.
That's right, yeah.
And they so at that point, at that very moment in time, I don't know if you agree or not, let me know what you think, Varun, but isn't that the moment where a news outlet ceases to be a news outlet and becomes literally a propaganda arm of the government?
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with that. Look, it's a case where the purity of the ideology takes precedence over what's actually happening in reality. And that's a very dangerous point that a society reaches, because like we saw in the Cologne sex attacks that we were just talking about, they did not want to report on it. there was a massive cover up. It didn't come out for a while.
About a week.
You know? Yeah, about a week or 2 weeks, something like that.
People were like uploading videos and they were getting taken down,
Yeah, yeah.
getting reported.
So it's incredible because here we have the police, you know, taxpayer funded. They're put in place to look after the society that, you know,
Serve and protect.
And instead, what they're saying is that it's more dangerous to report on these things
Yep.
because it's going to, you know, ruin. It's going to give the ideology that we're trying to push a bad name.
Sure.
That's just ridiculous.
Do you think the Greens MP has a point that, okay, so there's a crime problem, but just focusing in on one section of the community, like with the reporting and stuff that we acknowledge, do you think he has a point where the politician is trying to, you know, use fear to win votes or, you know, against the Labor government and against the left-wingers in Victoria? Or is that just like a kind of go-to statement?
That's politics.
Yep.
That's projection on the Greens members' parts because he constantly uses fear. Constantly. I mean, you know, that the right wingers, hey, if we start talking about Sudanese gangs, then the right wingers will start to take over, and before you know, it's 1930s Germany. That's, you know...
Well, it's a good point.
Can I just bring up that old... Remember that ABC worker who was raped and murdered a few years ago?
Yes.
What was her name? Jill something.
Yep.
And obviously, I mean, the perpetrator was not of African background.
No.
But, I mean, we were perfectly fine, you know, with putting his face up on television and reporting about his background. But as soon as it comes to, you know, non-white, non-Anglo communities, and we're reporting on their crimes, all of a sudden it's a sacred zone. We can't enter that zone. Look, the thing is, the truth is the truth, and at this point, it is African crime gangs that are causing havoc in Melbourne, Victoria. It's almost, they're like Australia's California, in a way. Yeah,
Oh, no, absolutely.
It's almost like a breakaway state at the moment.
Well,
And
this is
what
like
Peter Dutton
the
said
Safe
is,
Schools thing kicks off from there.
Yeah.
Right? That's where that comes from.
And Peter Dutton's absolutely right when he says that Victoria is almost like a parallel universe when it comes to Australia. Because there's things happening in Melbourne that's not happening anywhere else in Australia, you know?
And, you know, I just want to cast your mind back to the John Howard government, and the immigration minister at the time was Kevin Andrews.
Oh, yes.
And, you know, he's conservative, part of the conservative faction of the Liberal, the coalition. And it was under his watch that, you know, people started to talk about issues with Sudanese gangs in Melbourne. And the police minister in Melbourne at the time was a woman named Christine Nixon. And now she's retired, right? But she said, like, because he was saying, oh, look, you know, maybe it was a mistake to have this refugee program, basically, because of the flow-on effects that have come from this particular community in regards to crime and whatnot. It was pretty milquetoast stuff. She came out and basically said he's a Nazi and he's a racist because all of that is made up. Now, there was a scandal because after she retired, it turned out that he was 100% true and the police had the records and she was just lying. And she was basically saying, no, there's no record of that. But there was.
Yep.
And so, again, it's like we're playing politics, right?
Absolutely. Well, we've seen the same sort of things happening in Sweden, where they've changed the description of what constitutes a rape case or sexual assault case. They've started not reporting on the background of perpetrators.
That's right.
And that sort of stuff is going to creep into Victoria.
They tried to do that a few years ago in Victoria. I don't know if they did do it, but they did try to bring in that, you know, when they put out like an APB or something and the police make an announcement on the radio and like, oh, the suspect is a Caucasian male of, you know, such and such tall. They wanted to stop doing that because of like, oh, you know, this is going to cause, you know, stereotype, racial bias, etc. But I'm like, wait, if there's an opportunity to reduce the amount of potential suspects, and you're asking for the public's help, isn't it kind of counterproductive to say, okay, we're looking for a man wearing jeans and a T-shirt? It's like, well, I could look out my window right now and find 5,000 potential rapists according to that description. Yeah. But if we're looking for a particular guy with like a particular background or a particular ethnicity, isn't that the whole point of putting out the announcement in the first place?
Yeah, that's right.
I understand people have issues with like but racial bias and stuff, but logically that just makes no sense to me.
Well, I mean, Sydney went through this problem a couple of decades ago, where in the 80s we had Vietnamese gangs that were causing havoc. We went through the 90s where Middle Eastern gangs were causing havoc. And what actually stopped that was the Sydney Police Force was actually called the Middle Eastern Squad or Middle Eastern Crime Squad or something like that. Imagine calling...
Task Force Raptor.
Yeah. I think they're for the bikie gangs, but there was actually...
It's a cool name, though.
Yeah,
That's the main thing.
Yeah. But there was one actually called the Middle Eastern Crime Squad or something like that. And and they completely wiped it out. I mean, I'm not completely wiped it out. Obviously, there's still some sort of Middle Eastern, criminal elements going on around Sydney.
Oh, there's always criminal. This is the thing with Adam Bant, though, right? There's criminal elements going on with all people,
with all
in all
people,
cities,
absolutely.
Right? That's what he's getting at.
Yeah. But I mean, there is a sort of emphasised problem with African gangs in Melbourne at this very moment. And we have to recognise that for what it is. And it's not only just for the rest of Australia. It's for these very youths in Melbourne causing these criminal gangs, causing these riots or whatever you want to call it, the crime waves, because they do need help, And the best way to help them sometimes is tough love rather than placating,
Honesty.
multicultural ideologies.
Well, I know, Adam J., like you've said this before, and I have a lot of sympathy with this view. You've said it many times on these discussions that we've had. It's like, guys, you're in Australia now. You have a chance. Like this is your moment. Like you can come here and wipe your slate clean. You have an opportunity to make something. And I think what aggravates people like us who also come from immigrant backgrounds, right, is that our parents did it. And they had to start afresh. They started new, and they kind of left a lot of their baggage and shit behind because they recognised you've got like an opportunity of a lifetime here.
That's a trade.
Yeah.
That's
like
a trade.
It's tragic in a way.
Yeah,
right?
that every immigrant makes, that you leave something behind in exchange for a life that you can kind of forget about.
We give you a chance.
And the greater problem here with regards to progressives and how they see these things. And this is another thing that I like to think about is there isn't a problem, a lot of the Australian population doesn't have a problem with Sudanese gangs and that they act this way.
Yep.
In fact, I think they understand it. These are people that came from different cultures.
Brutal cultures
to have like an expectation that there's going to be some type of miraculous,
utopian moment.
Yeah, that's it. That they're going to start acting like Westerners straight away is not very realistic. No,
it's bullshit.
It's bullshit. And the problem that progressives have is they don't accept these problems, or they don't accept talking about these problems. No, it's not happening. Cologne, it didn't happen. Sweden. Oh, let's fudge the figures. Oh,
it's even worse than that, because sometimes they'll identify cultural differences, but then what we're talking about here is like, well, we understand that there may be like a propensity towards certain behavior based on like a cultural difference, and they're like, oh, you can't say that because you're attacking someone else's culture now. And it's like, well, if you're gonna play the cultural game, surely you have to take the good with the bad. Like, no one's saying that we're perfect.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and exactly right. And this is the big, reckless, callous mistake, strategic mistake, you can say, with regards to politics that progressives have made, and that is that, there's no pain. Letting in hundreds of thousands, even millions of people from other cultures into a country, whether it be it Australia, the United States, or Europe, that there is no pain. It's not happening. This is just an imagination. This is something that's created by the right and just kind of planted into your brain.
Sure.
And that, it's not really happening. Instead, what they should be saying is, multiculturalism is hard. It's happening, but let's work through it. And that's really where the resentment comes from a lot of these, Australian population or European population or the American population, where they say, hey, I'm not even that pissed off about Sudanese gangs. I expected it to happen. But why are you telling me it's not happening?
Yep.
Stop it.
That's an insult.
When I'm walking out on the street and I see 200 Sudanese gang members running a riot on street,
Yeah.
and then when I complain about it, I'm the one who's vilified for it.
Yeah.
They're going to say, well, what the hell's going on? I'm paying my taxes. I'm doing the right thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sure.
Why am I being painted in a bad light?
Well,
And it also, I would like to bring up Peter Dutton, who's brought this up. But, a couple of months ago when he was talking about the plight of South African farmers in South Africa, he was hounded down in Parliament for being a racist just for suggesting that white farmers in South Africa are being attacked, are being brutally murdered.
I think they were getting angry at the fact that he said like they integrate really easily because they already speak the language. Culturally, they're very similar. They're farmers, etc., 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 etc.
And which
But
part
which
of
is
that?
also-
Which part of that argument is wrong?
Exactly.
I mean, I would like to hear that from.
That's right. Yeah, I think generally, like in the Western world, and it's probably long overdue. We're now coming to that moment, like where, the rainbow laden platitudes are falling on, and now beginning to fall on deaf ears. Mm-hmm. And I think more and more people, like whether you be politician or media or just average Joe, like we are now being exposed to more and more conversation where it's like, okay, you know what? Those people over there who are like making all the promises that don't come true, they're just going to keep yapping regardless of what we do. Mm. So it's like, okay, let's talk
just do
facts
what
here.
we
Let's
do.
talk
Absolutely.
truth.
I mean, especially when you're seeing the compassionista crowd constantly
Shrinking.
talking about compassion and inclusivity, and they're the ones who are always going up, to events and saying, fuck you, fuck off. Yeah.
Highly tolerant.
Yeah, very tolerant. People see right through the facade, I suppose.
Well,
Charade.
speaking of that, let's move on. Let's throw this up.
Right, police have clashed in Melbourne overnight outside an event hosted by far-right Canadian speaker Lauren Southern.
Right.
More than 100 people chanted slogans and shut down a major highway outside the venue at Somerton in Melbourne's north. Miss Southern is known for her controversial views on multiculturalism, feminism and Islam.
No hate, no fear. Nazis are not welcome
Nazi.
here. No hate,
She's a Nazi.
no fear. Nazis are not welcome here. No hate.
Victoria Police are reportedly charging Ms Southern over $60,000 for their presence at the event. No arrests were made.
No arrests. See, the issue I have with that, you know what? I've made this point before on a different show, and I'll just reiterate it. There's a difference here, right? If we take the left extreme and the right extreme, and it depends on how you view the spectrum. But I tend to think, okay, if the left is about total government control, then obviously the opposite to that would be total anarchy. That's the way I view it. People have other theories about like horseshoe and like the more the far
Where
right you go.
extremes meet.
Okay.
Yep.
But let's just take a general boiled down view without getting too philosophical here. On the left side of the spectrum, we don't want speakers. See, if in our utopia, quote unquote, you would be allowed to march, you would be allowed to protest, you can be who you want to be, you can say what you want to say, free speech, baby. You can get out there, you can make signs, you can call people Nazis, whatever. On the flip side, in their utopia, we don't exist. We have to be eliminated
Yeah, by force.
if necessary.
If necessary, no,
Which is
primarily.
It's
I
what's
mean,
happened in the past, right? People like us get dragged out of bed in the middle of the night and shot in an alleyway
Yeah.
in their utopia.
Yeah, and if, a family member asks, what happened, well, it's in your interest to turn around now and walk out of this building.
Yeah.
Well, it's what defines them. They're defined by their opposition to the things that they hate, right? So, and that's, again, setting a very dangerous precedent because let's say they eliminate one whole group of people, okay? Who's the next group that they're going to turn the gun on?
Well, it's
And
like,
how long is it till the gun's turned around on them and say, hey, now you no longer fit the narrative. We're going to kill you.
it's that famous poem, isn't it, from Nazi Germany? The guy was like, first they came for the trade unionists. I didn't say anything because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the next group. I didn't say anything because I wasn't one of them. Then they came for me and there was nobody there to stop them.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
But, Lauren Southern, she's not a far right. She's not far right, even, if you listen to what she
she's
says.
not far right.
I've known actual people on the far right. They hate Lauren Southern. They're like, she's a pussy.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the same thing happened with Milo Yiannopoulos. They would say that he was far right. Look, he said some outrageous things, things that, polite society wouldn't say.
Polite.
Yeah. But, he does go and say these things. and they call him far right, but the far right hate the guy.
Yeah, they can't stand him.
They can't stand him.
No.
Yeah. Now, with Lauren Southern, look,
We're back. Okay, go.
yeah, okay. So if we're going to live in a society, we need some sort of common ethos, something that finds common ground between people. Now, if you're going to have multiculturalism as the ideology, the driving ideology, well, if you look at what cultures are, they define themselves as a set of traditions and values that are different from other cultures.
Yeah,
So-
and you're a link in the chain because this chain has gone unbroken for a certain amount of times because not all cultures have survived time. There have been cultures that existed in the past that were wiped out, stamped out, eliminated.
No, absolutely. And like, if you're going to have one culture and to define yourself as, different from the other one, well, then you're just creating segregated societies, countries within a country, right? And that's exactly what she was saying, and I think it's spot on. Now, you can have multi-ethnic, because ethnic's different. Obviously, it's more biological. But cultures are a set of ideologies.
Can I make a reference here that will seem flimsy and a bit, would you say, what's the word, flippant? Do you remember the movie The Incredibles?
Yeah.
Okay, so the villain in that movie gives himself superpowers to fight against the Incredibles, but he wants to give everybody superpowers. And the line that he says is, if everybody has superpowers, then nobody has superpowers. Same thing applies when you call everybody Hitler, right? If everybody's Hitler, then nobody's Hitler.
There is no Hitler.
So if all cultures are equal, like if all cultures are like supreme, then no culture. Like if this is an argument that we've had with friends of ours who are progressives, right? And I would say like if your culture is defined as multiculturalism, then you have no culture because your culture is literally defined by all of the other ones.
Yep.
So what is your culture? My culture is all of the other ones. Well, wait, what are all of the other ones? Well, that's my culture. It doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work that way. Because there's no common set of values, traditions, beliefs, and that's very important for a society to flourish.
Sure. Anything to add, Adam J, before
Oh no,
we kick the shit out of Europe?
No. Well, I think as a kind of like a segue, I think that's a very important point to remember when talking about Russia and the West.
I like
Just
it.
before we move off Lauren Southern,
You want to get off Lauren?
no, I just want to say about Lauren that, look, there are things that she says that I kind of don't particularly agree with all the way. I mean, another stir that she caused was something that along the lines of women aren't designed to be, CEOs of companies. That in itself is a form of identity politics, I find. Now, it might be true to an extent where, a lot of women probably don't want to be CEOs. But again, we got to bring that down to the individual level.
Sure.
There are some women who do want to be CEOs and very career-driven.
Oh, well, I think all women want to be the CEO of their household.
Yeah.
It's undeniable.
All right. I want to get into Europe and NATO. Should we kick it off with this Tucker Carlson clip that you sent through?
Sure.
Adam J? All right. Let's have a little listen here to Tucker. Tucker. Yeah, we're going to kick off the Europe discussion with an American talk show host. Let's go.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Last night we played your interview with President Trump from Helsinki. Part of that interview has made headlines today.
You stinky
People
and
are
Finland.
upset about it. It has nothing, by the way, to do with Vladimir Putin or Mother Russia.
Just want to say another unreported stat. The hoteliers and the tourist bookers in Helsinki are over the moon experiencing 200% growth on their usual.
It has no critical natural resources and limited strategic significance. Few Americans could find it on a map or name its capital or its president. That's not a slur against Montenegro. Apparently it's a nice place, but those are the facts about Montenegro. From an American perspective, it's not an important country. And yet suddenly, because of an act of Congress that few people noticed, Montenegro has profound significance to every American. Since last year, Montenegro has been a member of the NATO alliance. That means that if Montenegro ever finds itself in a war, our military is pledged to defend it. That's called a defense guarantee. Defense guarantees don't seem like a big deal until suddenly they are. That's how the First World War started. 37 million casualties later, the world began to rethink the wisdom of treaties like that. But the lesson seems to have been lost since.
Okay, just a quick word on that. Okay, so we're making World War One references. That's a problem. But second, okay, there's mutual defense treaties. Didn't Poland get fucked in the ass by one of when?
Well, I don't want to.
But here's my general boiled down point, and I just want to go to a couple of other articles as well to mix and match. But at the end of the day, it is just a piece of paper. In reality, right?
And
it can be
that's a
broken.
central point here that that NATO is about the credibility of Article 5.
Okay, we'll get to what NATO's about. So you also sent this through from David French, who was probably my least favourite author in that review.
Sure.
Yes, we should fight for Montenegro. So he's keeping his reputation with me personally. Once again, Donald Trump has raised questions about America's commitment to NATO, this time in an interview with Fox News' Tucker Carlson, which we just played. We didn't play the interview part. Carlson asked a variation of the typical question about American military commitments overseas. He puts the word typical in to minimize it. Why send our kids to fight in obscure foreign lands, which I would say is a genuine, heartfelt question that people ask themselves when their taxpayer dollars are going to things like NATO. Trump's response was troubling and revealing. Troubling because he didn't mount a defense of NATO, and revealing because it demonstrated that he may not even understand the nature of the alliance. I understand what you're saying. I've asked the same question. Montenegro is a tiny country with very strong people. They're very aggressive people. They may get aggressive, and congratulations, you're in World War III. Now, you also sent this through from the National Interest, and this was actually posted by someone we love as Molly Hemingway.
Yeah, she actually replied to one of my tweets.
Did she really?
Yes.
Wow. You need to put that on the fridge. Before President Donald Trump attempts real diplomacy with the Russian President Vladimir Putin at a summit in Helsinki on July 16, he'll first be subjected to another summit. That first summit is a gathering of leaders in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, aka NATO. These leaders continually assure the United States that they are America's best allies, even as most contribute little to America's defense and rack up huge trade surpluses with the United States. Trump will insist on a better deal, but should go farther and wind down US membership in NATO. So we're going to go to you for comment. We'll kick it off with Adam J. Here's what I think. I think that the corrupt spendthrift leaders of Western Europe need NATO to continue to exist in order to give themselves a reasonable excuse to keep funneling taxpayer money from Americans into their corrupt and horrible organisation, which hasn't been relevant since the end of the Cold War. Come at me, bro.
Well, you've
pumping up the bureaucracy.
No, well, you're working on an assumption that the Cold War is over. I think everyone would be very happy if the Cold War was over, but for a war to be over, both sides have to accept that the war is over. And while we would like to think that, it's over, it's done, the Russians don't see it that way.
Okay.
And, you can wish it true that it is over and that they do see it that way, but they don't. In fact, the Russians think that there was a gross injustice that happened after, when the Cold War wrapped up.
They certainly do. I made that point in a Periscope I did earlier in the week. Adam J, I said the Russian, even though most people in Russia were not communists, were not Bolsheviks, even at the end of that, they feel a tremendous shame because their position in the world has been diluted and diminished to where they are now.
I mean, let me just touch on something that you just said.
Okay.
Communism happened in Russia, and without the people of Russia, communism wouldn't have happened. I'm very sorry. This kind of argument that most Russians weren't Bolsheviks, that this was somehow pressed upon them. I mean, is a little bit, I guess, a little bit too clever.
Well, does the same apply to Poland?
No, well, if Poland unilaterally chose a system of government that is communism, then absolutely it will be, that's their decide and they own it. Russia...
There was a civil war in Russia.
Yeah, there was a civil war in Russia, and most people and the communists won in Russia for a very fucking good reason, because the majority of let's go to Ukraine as an example. Why do a lot of people in Ukraine identify as Russian? Communist nostalgia, Stalinist nostalgia.
Okay.
I mean, this is they're thinking, the times of the USSR were great for them, and for a lot of them it was.
Why? In what sense?
In what sense was that they felt that the communism gave them meaning. Communism was a rallying cry, something they could all band around.
Workers of the world unite.
That's right. There was and after the workers of the world unite, there was a kind
Workers
of
of the world kill everyone who disagrees.
Yeah, there was a Russian nationalism. So I mean that's something that we have to be fucking very clear about here.
But hang on, weren't they ethnic Russians like 400 years before that?
Yes, they were.
Okay.
I mean,
isn't that a factor?
It is a factor.
Okay.
But what we're talking about here is sovereignty.
Sure.
I mean, you got the same scenario in Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania. You got 30%.
Georgia.
Yeah, 30% Russian ethnic minorities. I mean, is this is this the kind of world we want to talk about, where basically, just because there's a minority of Russians in a certain country, that somehow, Russia can just slice off parts of these.
Well, I'm going to get in touch
countries.
with Adam Bant and the Greens Party, because you're now bashing minorities in Eastern Europe.
Absolutely. You can talk about the same thing here in Australia. I mean, go to Stratfield, go to Lickham. I mean, go to all these, there are ethnic minorities. Can China slice off just claim Stratfield? Can they?
Not yet.
Not yet. Well, because
Barack Obama isn't in office anymore.
yeah, you can say,
Take it
oh,
over.
well, there isn't a history of 400 years, but there will be a time where 400 years in the future.
Well, if you're going to talk about the history of 400 years, let's not forget that the Poles actually went into Russia and controlled Moscow as well. And like, if I see
let's slice off Moscow.
No, well, no. Well, Poland. That's just
that
not-
did happen though. And,
that's
and
not-
a
it's not-
lot of the animosity is
No.
stemmed from that period.
No. Poland did not take over Moscow. Moscow has never been conquered.
Yeah, it was controlled by Poles back in the 1700s for a while.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. They got very, very close, but that's just an inaccuracy. I mean, Poles as part of the French army that controlled under Napoleon certainly marched, against Moscow.
No, I'm talking before that.
No, before that? No, absolutely not. They didn't control Moscow.
I'm quite sure they did.
Damien, bring it up or something.
Okay,
I mean,
I'll
did
bring that
Poles-
shit up.
Yeah, bring that shit up.
Okay, keep talking.
So, I mean, look.
Well, okay, so
all right,
we're drifting.
Yeah, we're drifting.
Let's stick on the topic of
Yep.
NATO.
Yep.
Varun, do you want to write
Yeah,
a
sure.
response, write a reply? So what do you think about the NATO situation? Like I said,
Montenegro. We're
yeah.
coming back to Montenegro.
well, yeah, but let's, NATO more generally, right?
Yeah.
Mutual defense pacts, blah, blah, blah. But the existence of the organization itself
Yeah,
isn't
look-
up for review.
Yeah,
Is it on
look,
the table?
It like you said, it's a large, overgrown bureaucracy, and there are a lot of, fat cats getting fat off it. So there definitely needs a review. I think NATO is an organization that does need to stay in place, though. Now, the bad thing about that is that that's a reflection on Europe now. That without America's, sort of involvement in this organization, and with them footing so much of the bill, without that, what does that say about Europe? Are they just going to go to war and kill each other?
Yeah.
No.
And these are the same Europeans, by the way, who are talking about inclusivity, open borders, and Trump's an idiot. He's going to start World War III. Oh, hang on. Keep pumping billions of dollars into NATO, because otherwise we're going to kill each other and it'll be on you.
Why do American
no,
taxpayers need to continually
Why do they
fund
have to
the
foot the
defense
bill?
of Western
Why do
Europe?
they have to foot the bill?
Well, Western Europe, I don't think there's a question of Western Europe being under any threat. If you're talking about France or Germany or anything, there isn't a threat in the short term.
Okay.
Now, let's remember one thing, that, NATO was a brainchild, was a treaty to keep the Europeans happy, to keep them under the sphere of influence of America.
Yes, key word there, was.
Yes, was.
That's my point.
It
Yeah.
served two purposes, like to curtail German expansionism, right?
Yeah.
If that's what it
and to
was-
keep Russia at bay. Or
Yeah,
USSR
no,
at bay.
well-
If that's what it was, what is it now?
Yeah.
What is it now? It is a defense treaty that that is dealing with Russia, a butthurt country that really wants to relitigate the end of the Cold War. And I mean, let's look at doomsday scenarios here, just to think about it, right? If your opinion, if your argument of this, that Russia's not a threat, their GDP. Like this is a favorite thing.
Didn't say that.
No, I'm not saying, but this is a favorite thing that a lot of people say. You know, the GDP situation, the economy is absolutely horrible. Of course, the next day people talk about how Putin has done great things for the Russian economy, but that's a contradiction that, you know, it's not very important. And you know, people say, oh, you know, there's no threat from Russia. The GDP is very low. That if NATO ceased to exist, then Russia wouldn't do anything. Like, this is an argument that you hear a lot on social media. And the problem is that Russia would do something. And there's little doubt about that. And it's talked about openly, you know, in Russian nationalist circles, that if NATO was gone, well, they'll just take Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. They would cut the Scandinavian countries in half. I mean, this is reality. This is not, you know, this is something that, you know, that Trump and that a lot of his supporters just don't understand. That on one hand, they're talking about that, you know, Russia is not a threat. If you believe Russia is not a threat, get out of NATO.
No, look,
wrap it up. But if you're asking for more money, why are you asking for more money if Russia's not a threat?
And that's a thing. See, I think what we're dealing with here objectively. Now, we can have our own opinions about whether NATO is useful or useless. I tend to be more on the useless side, but I'm open to, you know, arguments. But I think what we're seeing here is once again the Donald Trump method of negotiation. So you put out there that, okay, this thing is useless. Why the hell are we doing this? We shouldn't even be involved. But the actual aim is to get the Western European nations, the member states, to increase their commitment, their contribution, so you can decrease yours, which is fair because America does pay the lion's share of this thing. Yep. And that money comes from American taxpayers, and it's a legitimate question, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no.
For like a, you know, someone who, you know, tends to a milk churn in Kansas somewhere to ask, like, why the hell am I paying for this thing? But in the end, you know, Trump can argue he got a victory because he got, you know, commitments to increase. Of course, they might not actually do it and all that kind of shit.
And next week, Donald Trump is going to announce a decrease in military spending as a result of increased spending from European countries.
No, I mean, you know, going by what...
See, that's...
hang on.
The military spending was already locked in.
Yeah, okay, let's
attack
that point directly.
But
I mean, just because European countries will spend more on defense doesn't mean that the American taxpayer is going to spend a dime less on military spending.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, let's remember another.
But it's about
thing.
responsibility.
Yeah,
here.
and let's remember
this
another
is your
thing.
home. This is your backyard.
Yeah, that's right, and that's what it comes down to. I mean, like you said, that American taxpayer working out there, right, in America, he's going to say, okay, Russia's going to step in. They're going to take enclaves from, you know, Scandinavian countries, you know, all these other satellite states. How does that affect me? Why should I foot most of that bill for that?
But don't tell me that Russia's not a threat.
No, I'm not saying that.
No,
Russia is.
I'm not saying you directly. I'm just saying in
generally.
general.
Okay.
Generally, okay. That if you think that it's not your area of responsibility, or you're sick of it, you're sick of the Europeans they're milking us, and they're, you know, we're getting schlonged and all these type of things. Fair enough.
Okay.
Step away, but don't you rationalize it by saying that things aren't going to happen. And there's a problem here because you know, one of the arguments is that, you know, Russia is not capable economically and militarily to be a real threat. And that's fine. In its current state, it's not. If it starts to cleave away all these European countries, then it will... Obviously, its GDP will rise and it will become an economic powerhouse. And then it becomes a problem. Now, if the end game is here, that, you know, Russia, that you say, not you, but that if you want to say that, oh, Russia's not a threat now, and we're just going to disengage, and Russia's going to clean up Eastern Europe and then actually be a threat, and we're going to have to involve ourselves militarily eventually, then you're going to be paying.
Can I just say in response to that, okay, it's a good point you make, because if you do disengage, Russia does have the potential to become, you know, a stronger country. But now, in that context, if you've got countries in the EU sending billions of dollars for gas pipelines to USSR, and then getting America to come in and
to the Russian Federation.
USSR, sorry, to Russians, and then getting America to come in and foot the bill for their protection. I mean, that's a bit rich. Wouldn't you say that's a bit rich?
I want to say something else too, though. Now, with respect, I think the issue here is when you say things like cleave off parts of Eastern Europe, that invokes like a kind of war imagery and stuff. Now, part of the reason I wanted to have this conversation with you today is because I hate it that the Democrats have memed legitimate threat into non-existence because they've carried on with a particular like thread, which is just objectively completely false. In that Russia basically won the election for Donald Trump. If you look at the data, you look at the figures, it's just simply untrue. It's like 0.001% of all Twitter posts from Russia in regards to the election on both sides came, from that. There was like $100,000 spent on Facebook ads. There was some attempted hacking that didn't actually work. They tried to hack the RNC as well. And there was some opinion pieces on RT, which has lower ratings in America than fucking CNN does, which is unbelievable in of itself. But see, when you say things like, cleave off parts of Eastern Europe, that invokes like war imagery, tanks rolling in. It doesn't have to be that way. You can be a threat by helping to promote certain governments in those regions which are friendly to you, which will then do your bidding, which then like builds like a kind of domino effect. Why take over the territory if you can just own the person in the government?
Yeah, and I mean, you can say the same argument. Why would you use Russian intelligence assets to try and to talk about your point of view, your worldview in English-speaking countries?
That happens.
Yeah, when you can just convince people to do the work for you.
And the other thing is, it's not just Russia.
Yeah, and it's not just Russia, and this,
they're doing it to them too.
And these comes to these weird contradictions that I personally see. Within the Trump administration.
We'll get to that. We'll get to Helsinki. The only thing I could find about the Polish occupation of Moscow is a YouTube clip. And in the description, I haven't put the YouTube clip up. In the description, it says the combined Russian and Swedish forces were defeated on the 4th of July, 1610 at the Battle of Klushino, or Klushin, however you say it, where 5,000 Polish elite cavalry, the Hussars under Hetman Stanislav Sloviski, defeated the numerically superior Russian army of about 35,000 to 40,000 soldiers. This giant and surprising defeat of the Russian forces shocked everyone and initiated the Polish occupation of Moscow.
There you go.
Okay. But I don't know if it's worth
YouTube.
anything.
I mean, it's not very reliable.
We do need to kick along, though, because we want to get to Trump and Helsinki. First, I wanted to play this because this was something that Donald Trump tweeted out himself, and because in response to the media outrage that he's never denounced any Russian involvement in the 2016 election, just thought I'd play this, and he's got the dates up. Oops, hang on, let me fix that.
Other countries and other people, and I can say that when we lost 22 million names and everything else that was hacked recently, they didn't make a big deal out of that. That was something that was extraordinary. That was probably China. We have much hacking going on. Well, I think it was Russia, and I think it could have been other people
in other countries. Poland?
Could have been a lot of people interfered. I think it was Russia, but I think it was probably other people and or countries. It was Russia, and I think it was probably others also. Well, the Russians had no impact on our votes whatsoever, but certainly there was meddling, and probably there was meddling from other countries and maybe other individuals.
Okay, and one more short one I want to play here. This was Rand Paul in the Senate the other day, last week. So.
Trump derangement syndrome has officially come to the Senate. The hatred for the president is so intense that partisans would rather risk war than give diplomacy a chance. Does anybody remember that Ronald Reagan sat down with Gorbachev and we lessened the nuclear tensions? We need to
Adam
still
J.
have
shaking his
those
head over
open.
there.
No, that's fine.
Nobody is saying or excusing Russia's meddling in our elections. Absolutely. We should protect the integrity of our elections. But simply bringing the hatred of the president to the Senate floor in order to say, we're done with diplomacy, we're going to add more sanctions and more sanctions. You know what? I would rather that we still have open channels of discussion with the Russians. Kennedy, at the height of the Cold War, had a direct line to Khrushchev, and it may have prevented the end of the world. Should we be so crazy about partisanship that we now say we don't want to talk to the Russians. We're not going to have relations with the Russians. We should stand firm and say, stay there.
To be fair, everyone was like, Donald Trump can't talk to the Russians, and if he does talk to the Russians, we need to be led into the private meeting. Let me give you my thoughts on the press conference, and then we'll go to both of you. So here's my thought, because the press conference was apparently the end of the world watching the terrible mainstream press, right? But here's my thoughts. Nobody knows what they discussed backstage, and to me, Trump could have used some stronger language in parts. It looked to me like an inexperienced guy in a high-pressure situation speaking to the world press. And what he says for public consumption to the world press isn't necessarily what the reality is behind closed doors. And I think everybody accepts that as a logical reality of politics at that level. But it looked to me like someone inexperienced who was trying to balance a line between, wanting like a diplomacy and trying to fight off his enemies domestically. So he was trying to balance between foreign policy and domestic policy because he's been getting bashed for this Russia thing. So he had to push back against that, but he couldn't use too strong a language because that would embarrass Putin on the world. So he was trying to find a way through that minefield, and it wasn't perfect. And I think he made a couple of mistakes. He could have used some stronger language. He could have, said things a different way. But in saying that, the reaction has been just completely way over the top, and I think it's ridiculous.
Can I just build on that?
Sure.
Right, because I agree with that analysis. Now, the thing is, there's two scenarios here, okay? You've got meddling and you've got collusion.
There's three, actually, because it went from collusion to interference to meddling. So now it's like they're a bunch of Scooby-Doo kids. Like, I would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for you meddling kids.
Yeah, but the thing is, the two main ones are collusion and, whether you want to call it meddling or whether you want to call it interference. Now, the thing with Trump is, and I think the more he grows into his presidential persona, he'll become more experienced in how to discern how to approach the situation. Now, he's got that New York swagger, he's in a Queen's style bravado. And so that
was actually missing from that press conference, which what makes it kind of weird, right?
But the thing is,
we'll come to that in the Die Hard clip.
He'll be loose with his words because that's, it's just part of his persona. He'll be loose with his words. And sometimes that works. It works really good because if he's loose with his words, it gets the media spinning, because there can be various interpretations of it. And the media, by default, will go for the extreme worst, most negative interpretation you can take out of that.
Yep.
They're going to run with that story, and then Trump's going to put out some kind of executive order or policy or something or the other, and just go... That's not at all what I was saying. You're fake news.
He talks in a stream of consciousness. Yeah. Like, it's not, everything isn't programmed. He talks like a guy at a bar. Like, hey, I know this guy builds the best buildings. They're the tallest buildings you've ever seen in your life. They're absolutely beautiful. And then CNN's like, we fact-checked this. There are 4 buildings taller than the one. And then his friend built.
Exactly. Now, the thing is, with this press conference, I think... because he did mention that he has great confidence in his intelligence community, right? Now... Excuse me. If he went and said that I have great confidence in my intelligence community, there's an investigation, I'd rather not comment on that. They have found some evidence, but that's, I'll leave it to them to figure it out.
You could have said, we'll wait till the investigation's finished.
Till it's concluded, and let's just move on from that because I don't want to interfere on the great job that the intelligence community does.
Bang.
And if he left it at that and moved on, would have been great. But then, like you said, he's trying to walk that fine line where he's kind of using his persona of using the words loosely, and it didn't belong in that situation.
It didn't work.
Now, when I said that he's going to grow into his presidential persona, because he's growing into it pretty well, I think, he's going to realize that works best when he's in control of the situation, when he's talking about policies that come from him.
Yep.
But when you've got external actors,
stay in your lane.
Yeah, that's right. That's it.
Before we go to you, Adam J., you sent this through. This is from Town Hall, which they have some really good opinion pieces. I don't agree with heaps of it. But there is actually, it's like a libertarian kind of...
Oh, there's a nice spread, I guess.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good website. So Town Hall, it's more alternative media as well. Like they take a punt on people.
Yeah,
so
sometimes,
I like that.
yeah. They got mainstream and...
Yeah, they do. They mix it in. It's a blend. It's good. John and Andy Schlafly, any relation to Phyllis?
No, I don't know.
Okay. Trump's remarkable press conference. Now, okay, so the bias of the author is going to be immediate. Like, it will hit you in the face, but, take it on board. President Trump's press conference with Russian President Vladimir Putin, I'm turning Russian now, was remarkable in how Trump refused to pay homage to liberal fiction about hackers stealing the last election. Instead, Trump went on the offensive and laid blame for deteriorating relations with Russia where blame is due at the doorstep of Mueller's delusional investigation. They are going all in, pushing the chips all in behind Trump. Many on the left dislike Russia now because it is an increasingly Christian country, that's true, that changed the name of Leningrad to St. Petersburg, which is also true, and even enacts pro-life laws, which is also true. Communism was overthrown in Russia more than a quarter of a century ago, which is also true, and its trend towards conservative values today angers leftists immensely, which is also true. So why did you send that through, and why is it wrong?
Well, first off, the Russians didn't overthrow communism. Communism broke apart and they had no choice.
True.
Second, there's another paragraph down there where the author basically says, well, that Russia is more conservative now than Western Europe, which is on the face of it true. But what type of conservatism are we talking about? I mean, we could say that, for fuck's sake.
Yeah, let's break it down here.
Yeah, ISIS is more conservative than Melbourne. It doesn't mean I'm going to hop in bed with ISIS.
NATO developed as a counterweight to the communist Soviet Union. But with Russia becoming more conservative than Europe, it is unclear why we are still spending billions on NATO. Its largest country, Germany, is dependent on Russia for natural gas, and no amount of American troops in Europe can force Russia to turn that pipeline on if she were one day to shut it off.
Yeah, and that's right. And but coming back to Helsinki, what happened at the press conference?
Helsinki.
I think it was a battle between two people. One leader saw this as an intelligence operation, where really there were two main, axis of public consumption that we can, have a bite at. There was a meeting. There was a meeting between Trump and Putin. We can speculate about what was said between those two leaders, and a lot of that will be bullshit because we don't know.
Yep.
What we saw from Vladimir Putin was press conference where he stood alongside Donald Trump, where basically, frankly, he didn't have to say much because Trump did a lot of the apologizing for him.
Oh, that was cringe.
I mean, it's not a question. It's not a question of Donald Trump to answer the question if there is Russian interference in the elections. It's up to Vladimir Putin. And for me, that was something that stood out. And I know Vladimir Putin did, reject that, but it's his fight. It's not Donald Trump's fight, and that's
okay.
And that's
an interesting take.
And you should pivot from that.
No, well, it's all about jurisdiction.
Yeah,
I guess you could say it's
what
up to
Vladimir. What did you think about welcoming Robert Mueller to fly over to Moscow and go through the books?
That's and another part of the Vladimir Putin intelligence operation, And I'm not saying this in a way to kind of have a go at Vladimir Putin.
No, this is why we bring, because you bring a critical angle to this stuff.
That's how the Russians see this: discipline, clear aims. They've had a leader now that provides them with geopolitical continuity. It's when you change leaders every 4 to 8 years, like we see in America and other Western liberal democracies. Continuity is a problem.
Can I throw something just to add to that?
Yep.
I saw Steve Pachenik, Steve Pachenik on the War Room. He offers great analysis, whether you agree with him or not. That's for you. He was talking about this morning on the War Room and basically said, people don't understand that Putin was selected. And we did a big part in selecting him because he goes, let's be honest, we couldn't have another Yeltsin who was a drunk and nobody respected and the place was falling apart. And Mikhail Gorbachev, he goes, he was a great guy and a good leader, but he was really weak. So we needed somebody in Russia at that particular time after Yeltsin who had to be a bit of a strong man. He goes, we selected him. Like the
absolutely.
Americans did.
And there was a lot of, optimism when it comes to Vladimir Putin. I can remember back, when was it now? Was it 99? So long time ago.
Do you remember how bad Yeltsin was?
Yeah,
people
absolutely.
forget he was falling over Trump.
next to Bill Clinton.
Oh, yeah, perfect match.
Yeah, it was basically falling out of airplanes.
Hey, Boris, you want to get on some of these lines of
And
coke?
Vladimir Putin
I
was
know a
a
girl named
great
Monica.
hope. It was a
She'll
great
rock your socks.
Yeah, Vladimir Putin was a great hope of the West. You know, Vladimir Putin, and there were, you know, honest and forthright discussions about, you know, let's wrap up NATO. We don't need NATO. Let's invite Russia into NATO.
Do you think Russian aggression since then has now reinforced, discussions around NATO and why it's important?
Well, I think, quite frankly, that the Russians sensed weakness, and that comes from the George W. Bush administration, the Obama administration. You know, these are one of the contradictions that you got to think
The
about.
liberalism in Western Europe.
And this is very important. You know, on one hand, Donald Trump says, well, you know, the West has been, you know, too hard on Russia, that we kind of need to wind it back. So what exactly is the problem of Germany buying energy from Russia?
No, see,
that's
this is the
a
thing.
different-
I don't think it's a problem, but I thought it was brilliant the way Donald Trump highlighted, because it was a slap in the face to his detractors. Like, hey, you're here telling me that Russia's this big problem, they're a threat to democracy, they're evil dudes, then why the hell are you buying fuel from them? Yeah. And that simple talk, fires people.
I think that whole argument is bunk, to be honest. I mean, there's a...
It's not necessarily an argument. It's like a hand grenade.
It is a hand grenade, but you know, countries buy products of other countries that they don't really agree with all the time.
Yeah, but
all the time.
That's
I mean,
fine.
I filled up petrol today, and you know, thanks to a Saudi Wahhabist, regime in Saudi Arabia, I didn't choose to walk here.
But they aren't saying that, our leader is a spy
But
for
if
them.
you've got a German, what's his name, Schroeder, who's now the
Gerhard.
Schroeder. He's like the main marketing head of, is it Gazprom?
Yep.
Yeah, Gazprom, and he's now trying to make sales all across Europe for this Russian company, and then at the same time saying, Russians are the biggest threat to us. By the way, we need $4 billion or $10 billion or whatever.
The biggest threat till the gas bill comes in
to save us. Oh, by the way, the guy who's putting money into our pocket is colluded with Russia. The whole thing's a fucking joke. It is a joke.
Politics is a farce.
Because this is one of these myths out there that Western Europe somehow dragged the United States into a conflict with Russia. No, it was the United States and Russia that had an ideological disagreement that spanned many, many decades. And it was America always convincing Western Europe, because Western Europe didn't give a shit about...
Be more capitalist.
Yeah, Western Europe didn't give a shit about Poland, and they still don't. You know, there's a lot of nationalists in Western Europe that are quite happy to hand back Eastern Europe back to the Russians.
Yeah, they would be happy.
Yeah, they would be happy. Yeah. And Nigel Farage, and all these...
I don't think Nigel Farage wants to hand Poland back to Russia.
Absolutely. And, you can look at Vladimir Putin...
I don't think for the cause of just handing Eastern Europe back, but I think they see those old times as better. Like the Troubles, that's where the curtain was. The problem stayed there.
I don't think he even thinks that.
Oh, absolutely. I think he absolutely does.
I think because he doesn't jump on board with the Russian outrage, you get the opinion that he wants to hand Poland back to Stalin.
Oh, no, not hand Poland back to Stalin, but hand Eastern Europe back. That Russia is a superpower, and all these Eastern European countries that they lost under communism really do, in a sense,
it's not going to happen. You're not going back to Russia. Can we put that line in? That is not going to happen.
And that's part of the problem here, Boogie, that Eastern Europeans don't feel that way. Yeah. Donald Trump's performance in Helsinki didn't give us a lot of, how could I say, confidence in what you're saying. Your assurances are great. Hey, but Donald Trump's...
I'll get on the phone to him right now.
Yeah, no, yeah, but
I know what you mean. Yeah.
You know what you mean?
Yeah.
But that the way he approaches Russia, the way he talks about Russia, and you can say, hey, he's installed sanctions.
He was a rock star when he went to Poland.
Yeah, absolutely.
Last year.
Because he's done things like that have
energy deal.
Yeah, but the problem here is that he's done the difficult things right, but the easy things, he's absolutely butchered, and that's what happened.
That puts Poland kind of like the Polish leadership in a kind of a bind here at the moment, doesn't it? Because on the one hand, they're ideologically affiliated with what Trump's saying about nationalism, European nationalism, but then his assurances are kind of weak for Eastern Europe, because if he's going to give kind of Russia a bit of a leeway, kind of back off a bit, then the same people who are saying, "Oh, we're ideologically affiliated with Trump," well, do they still support?
Support because that's the thing. That's the difference between the East and the West. Ideological affiliation matters less than national affiliation.
Well, by ideological, I mean national.
Yeah, no. Whoa.
I suppose more cultural than
there's
national.
There's a lot of conservatives in Poland that
they'd rather see their country burn than be communist again.
That's it. Or put it another way, that they can agree with Donald Trump 100% about, be it gay rights, reproductive rights, about all these cultural issues. But if you're willing to hand back Poland to the Russians, you can go get fucked. Yeah. And there is no negotiation with that. Donald Trump found the line. His groveling display in the White House after he came back.
That was bad.
That
was worse than the press conference.
And he went a certain way and he should have stuck to it. But this is even worse.
Yep.
That he was on show, that he found the line. The State Department, switchboard must have been off the hook.
Yep.
From Eastern Europe, and there are a lot of Republican leaders out there that absolutely hammered him, and there weren't too many that defended him. And he was all by himself because he found the line. He found
amazingly, Rand Paul was the only one who was really public, and he's the one who should be least in line with Donald Trump because of like the libertarian stuff. Right?
Yeah, and me, I love Rand Paul to bits.
The Paul family.
Yeah, the Paul family in general, but he's
Do you think that was a bad move on his half? Like, what he says is like, this is the problem with, this is why I've smacked you around the head a couple of times about libertarianism. Like, it exists in this like theoretical sphere where like, okay, we say we want argument, we want open discussion, but reality on the ground is sometimes it's got to be different, right?
Yeah, well, I'm pretty sympathetic to the argument that a lot of Americans make about that they've spilled a lot of blood to make Europe what it is now. And I think that Europe as a large has been totally ungrateful, that the least that they could do is spend, for fuck's sake, that 2% of GDP on defense.
And let's give a little tip of the hat to Poland, probably, if not the only, one of the only countries in NATO that actually pays their share.
Well, there's 4 countries, I believe, that pay their fair share, and I think Poland has actually dipped below the 2%. I think they're 1.9%, and that's because they've had better than expected growth.
Sure.
It's a lagging indicator.
And Poland has a real keen interest, obviously, in keeping NATO there.
Well, they're on the border.
They're on the border. And on top of that, Russia's really angry with them for, supporting the Orange Revolution in Ukraine. They're constantly talking about having NATO expansion.
And Poland was a supporter of Georgia with all their problems that they had with regards to Zazashvili or whatever his name is. That. I'm not in favor of Georgia joining NATO. I'm not in favor of Ukraine. I think that the lines have been drawn now, and
this is it. This is
it.
Yeah.
I mean, if you were keen on joining NATO,
are you in favor of kicking Turkey out?
No.
Wow.
No, and there's a very simple reason for this: that the Turkish people are, held pointed nukes at the USSR for decades.
Past tense.
Yeah, and I remember
it's a very different place now.
Yeah, and that's fine. But that's the part of the thing that that I'm in favor of remembering great deeds from the past.
But you can't live in the past.
No, you can't live in the past.
You can't base the
You can't live in the past. But the Cold War finished only 30 years ago, and that's 2 blinks of an eye, really, in the grand scheme of things.
Erdogan's been in power 15 years.
Yeah, he has. Yeah. But I don't think. I think there's a more of a chance of Turkey leaving NATO
to join Russia
than the other way around of NATO kicking Turkey out. And this is part of the kind of
I don't
problem.
see it that way. I think a lot of what Trump is trying to do with Vladimir Putin, in some ways, is bring Russia closer to America, and this will in turn isolate nations like Turkey, like Iran.
And I think the Russians think something completely different. I think that the Russians are keen on cleaving away Turkey. I'm talking about sphere of influence. I'm not talking about invasion. I'm talking about influence.
Gotcha.
That the Russians have been very cozying up to the Turks. I think Erdogan, to his credit, is a little bit skeptical of Russia. Like he's not that, in bed with Russia or in any sense of the word.
He
both play that.
shot one of their planes down a couple of years ago.
Didn't they shoot the bodyguard in the museum or whatever?
Yeah, absolutely. So
they're all shooting each other.
Yeah.
We do have to wrap it up. Final thoughts, final words.
I just wanted, on the Helsinki thing, I wanted to get back to that point where I said, there's two scenarios, there's meddling and then there's collusion. And I think what gets done, what happens, the two can be mutually exclusive. They don't have to be wrapped up in one ball where if there was meddling, then it's definitely collusion. And I think both sides, the left and the right, or Trump supporters and anti-Trumpers, they both kind of don't recognize that fact, because as soon as there's evidence of interference, then it's automatically collusion. And same thing over there. The people on the right who want to fight against it, they go, well, there was no collusion, there was no interference at all. None of it is true. So you got to separate the two, investigate them separately.
Yeah, and that's a problem, because that's a lot of that has to do with the media and opportunistic politicians who have created this false dichotomy argument where you either have to say Donald Trump is a Russian spy, or you have to look at the person saying that, saying you're a fucking lunatic, and that's where the conversation ends.
Yep.
And that's the issue. I'm really angry about this stuff because, people taking advantage of our open systems is not funny. Like, it's not a game. It is real. It happens. The issues with China, especially in Australia, but also in America, are well documented. We've sent experts to speak to their senators and their congressmen. It doesn't get 1 inch of paper columns. And it's like, hey, here's evidence of the last 10 years of China trying to buy off politicians, of injecting money into universities, of trying to, bring us under the sphere of influence. We have a former premier who's now shilling for China on a weekly basis. Oh, we need to be more in touch with China. We need to ingratiate ourselves to the Chinese system. We had our foreign minister, Julie Bishop. Imagine if this happened in the Donald Trump regime, right? We had our foreign minister, Julie Bishop, on a trip to China, like tweeting like a fucking 15-year-old idiotic schoolgirl. And she's like our head of foreign affairs. She's tweeting like a schoolgirl. I'm just in China. It's so wonderful to be working together with new friends, and then like tweeting little Chinese flags.
Yeah.
It's like, where's the outrage? Like, what the hell is going on?
The funny thing is, with all this trade war talk between America and China, Chinese newspapers actually have more respect for Trump than Western newspapers do. And that kind of blew my mind. And a lot of people...
Because it's face. They respect his power.
And his entrepreneurship, because Chinese...
I don't know. If
they make Barack Obama get off the back of the plane, right? Like jump onto a mattress onto the tarmac, Barry. They wined and dined Donald Trump in the Forbidden City, where only emperors go. So,
But then, definitely their newspapers are much more forgiving to Trump than Western newspapers are. And that was something that I remember hearing on... The Outsiders program was Ross Cameron when he recently went to China. He was reading out headlines from Chinese newspapers, and I was, oh wow, okay. So they actually have a much.
They know how to work.
Those government-run newspapers, you can always rely on them for a headline. Final thoughts, voice reason, Adam J.
No one's asking the Americans to go fight in Montenegro. Montenegro is not going to unilaterally attack Russia.
Okay.
NATO is a defense pact. If Russia would to decide to attack a country, then Article 5 is invoked, which I might remind everyone the only time it was invoked was when after the September 11 attacks.
Yep.
No,
I think Montenegro actually has people in forces in Afghanistan.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Do they really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. Wow. So I mean, for the very same reasons that Tucker Carlson talks about, that Montenegro is an insignificant country, is they know it themselves. They're not going to go on a jaunt to Russia to stoke up World War III.
It probably, for them, like for their politicians, there's some kind of political interest in here. It gives them more, like a seat at the table. They can gain more influence in other areas like trade and stuff. And, hey, we're now open. We're part of the team. Like that kind of shit happens.
It's tokenistic. Let's Montenegro.
It is just a piece of paper.
Yeah, it is just a piece of paper. Now, what stops war with Russia? If you don't want to have war with Russia, you just have to it's built on the credibility of Article 5, which is, you can put in two parts. One is spending on defense, making sure that there is a credible, when you say that if Russia attacks a NATO country, that there is a credible defense force there to act upon it. And two is saying the right things in public. Okay. And this is the great, minus 10-point moment that Tucker Carlson had here, that you got to make it believable. And when Vladimir Putin asked Chris Wallace what happened with the West, that is the answer. That
interview was a disgrace, by the way. Just got to put that out there. Chris Wallace made a fool of himself.
He did. But, what was a great performance by Vladimir Putin, the problem, the one area where he kind of, I guess, opened himself up was the question, what happened to the West? And, on the back of the West's greatest victory, truly, the eradication of communism in Europe, it is now just so rudderless, so just completely questioning itself in every aspect.
By losing their greatest foe, they then could no longer define themselves. And they left themselves open to becoming what they hate.
That's it. And there we go.
That's a good way to wrap it
up. We can get in touch with you. Well, you can get in touch with me. Sorry, let's throw up the screen here. Boogie Bumper on Twitter. Get in touch with Voice Reason Adam J. Ted Dabrowski's got the screaming meme as he's better. Get in touch with Varun Prasad, Emergent Paradigms. Keep in touch with any new videos, new podcasts, whatever, via the Common Discourse Twitter account at TCD Tweets. Gents, it's been an absolute pleasure. We'll rock and roll. We'll do this again real soon.
Till next time.
Beautiful.
Till next time, we'll see you then.
See ya.
Bye-bye.